Am I the asshole for refusing to pay for my younger sister's wedding despite my parents' insistence? Family is supposed to be about love and support, right? At least that's what they always tell me. But in my case, family seems to mean one thing: I pay and they take. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. I scroll through my phone and there it is, another post from my sister Emily. Something about how you can't count on certain people, even family. I know exactly who she's talking about. She hasn't spoken to me in days, and honestly, I don't care anymore. I did what I had to do. But a small part of me still wonders, was I wrong? I guess I should start from the beginning. I'm the oldest, the responsible one, the one who was expected to figure things out on my own. My parents always said they were proud of me, but somehow that pride never came with any actual support. I worked my way through college, juggling part-time jobs and student loans, while Emily had everything handed to her. I still remember when she turned 16. She woke up to a brand new car sitting in the driveway, wrapped in a giant red bow. Meanwhile, I had to save every spare dollar I made to buy my first used car. My parents always had an excuse. We just want to give her the best. She's the youngest. She deserves to be spoiled a little. But it was never a little. It was everything. When it came time for college, I applied for scholarships, took out loans, and worked my ass off. Emily, she got her full tuition paid for. No questions asked. And when she dropped out after a year because she wasn't feeling it, my parents didn't say a word. They just let it go. I should have known then that nothing would ever change. But I still tried to be a good brother. I worked hard, built my own business from the ground up, and finally got to a place where I didn't have to worry about money anymore. It wasn't easy, but I made it. And somehow, that meant I was now responsible for everyone else. A few months ago, Emily got engaged. My parents were over the moon. From the moment she announced it, they started planning the kind of wedding you see in movies. Fancy venue, designer dress, expensive catering. There was just one problem. They had no money to pay for it. But instead of adjusting the budget or cutting back on expenses, they did what they always did. They turned to me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Can you help with the engagement party? Sure. Could you chip in for the dress? Fine. I figured it's just a couple of things. It won't be that bad. But then the request kept coming. The venue deposit is due. Can you cover it? We found a better catering service, but it's a little over budget. Can you pitch in? The decorations are going to be expensive, but we can't have a cheap-looking wedding, right? I started to feel uneasy. This wasn't helping anymore. This was funding the whole thing. I sat my parents down thinking I could reason with them. I want to support Emily, but I can't pay for everything. I have my own future to think about. They didn't see the problem. My mom just smiled and said, "Oh, come on, you're doing well. It's not like you can't afford it." My dad added, "It's family. We all help each other." I looked over at Emily, expecting her to at least acknowledge that this was a big ask. But she barely glanced up from her phone, like none of this had anything to do with her. That was the moment I realized they weren't asking. They had already decided. In their minds, I was going to pay for this wedding whether I wanted to or not. And that's when I knew I had a choice to make. It started like a slow leak, a little here, a little there. At first, it didn't seem like much. A few small expenses, a deposit for the engagement party, some extra money for Emily's dress. I told myself it was just helping out. It was family after all. But deep down, I knew how this story would go, and I was right. The wedding plans started growing like a wildfire. Suddenly, it wasn't just a simple event anymore. It was a grand production, the kind of wedding that belongs in magazines, not in the hands of people who can't afford it. And every time I thought I had given enough, they came back asking for more. The venue deposit is due. Can you cover it? We found a better catering service, but it's a little over budget, just a couple thousand more. We need professional photographers. Memories last forever. Each request came wrapped in the same excuse. It's for Emily. It's just this one time. It's what family does. I tried to push back. I tried to be reasonable. I'm already helping, I told them one night over dinner. I can't pay for everything. My mom waved a hand like I had just said something ridiculous. Oh, come on. It's not like you can't afford it. My dad leaned forward. It's one day. One day to make your sister happy. There it was again. One day. That's what they always said, wasn't it? It's just one thing. Just one favor. Just one time. But with them, it was never just one time. I turned to Emily, waiting for her to say something, to acknowledge that maybe this was too much. But she barely looked up from her phone, scrolling like this entire conversation was boring her, like it was just a given that I was going to pay. That's when my mom dropped the bomb. "We already put a deposit down on the venue," she said carefully, like she was testing the waters. "We just need help covering the rest." I frowned. The rest? The catering, the decorations, the photography. She listed off like they were minor details. Oh, and the DJ. And we were thinking a live band for the cocktail hour would be nice too. I blinked. "How much are we talking?" She hesitated. Then, like she was saying something completely normal, she said, "Around 35,000. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It wasn't even funny, but the sheer audacity of it caught me so off guard that I actually laughed. "That's insane," I said. "I'm not paying that." My dad's face tightened. "It's not just for her, it's for the family. People will talk if it's not done right." There it was, the real reason. This wasn't about Emily. This was about appearances, about throwing a wedding that would make my parents look good, about impressing the relatives who'd show up, eat their free meal, and go home without a second thought. I shook my head. "If you can't afford this kind of wedding, then maybe it needs to be smaller." My mom gasped like I had just said something offensive. "Smaller? Do you want your sister to be embarrassed?" No. What I wanted was for her to be realistic. But that had never been Emily's strong suit. The pressure didn't stop. Every day, there was a new call, a new message. "I just don't understand why you're being like this," my mom sighed over the phone one night. "You have the money." That was the part that really got to me. They weren't even asking anymore. It wasn't, "Can you help?" It was, "You have the money, so why won't you?" The final straw came when my mom called again, voice all sweet like she was about to ask me for something small. "So, we were thinking you could cover the honeymoon." I nearly dropped my phone. "What?" "Well, we've already stretched the budget for the wedding," she said like it was my problem. "And it would be such a nice gift. Imagine how happy Emily would be." I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Are you serious? Do you even hear yourselves?" "Don't raise your voice," my dad snapped. "We're just asking for help." "No," I shot back. "You're expecting me to fund this entire wedding. You're treating me like a damn ATM." There was silence on the other end. Then my mom, voice cold, said, "I didn't think you were this selfish." And that was it. That was the moment I knew there was no reasoning with them. Later that night, Emily posted on social media, "Some people talk about family, but when it really matters, they're nowhere to be found." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. The comments poured in, friends and distant relatives offering sympathy, agreeing that family should always be there for each other. Not one of them knew the full story. Not one of them offered to help pay either. And that's when I knew this wasn't about love. This was about what they could get from me. The calls wouldn't stop. Every time my phone buzzed, I already knew what it was about. A relative wanting to talk, but really just trying to guilt trip me. My parents still pushing the same tired argument, family helps family. Emily? She wasn't speaking to me directly, but her social media posts did all the talking. I ignored them at first. I told myself I didn't care, but the weight of it all started pressing down on me. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I should have just given in. After all, what's money compared to family? Then I remembered. I remembered the nights I worked late shifts while Emily got everything handed to her. I remembered my parents telling me to be responsible while they threw money at her every whim. I remembered struggling to pay off my student loans while she got a fully funded education, only to drop out without a second thought. And now, they expected me to pay for her wedding? No. I picked up the phone and called my parents. This time, I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to argue. "I'm not paying," I said, before they could even start. "I've already helped more than enough. If you can't afford this wedding, then scale it down." My mother gasped like I had just cursed at her. "How can you say that? She's your sister. This is the most important day of her life." "Then maybe she should be the one paying for it," I said. Silence. Then my father spoke, voice heavy with disappointment. "So this is who you've become? Someone who turns his back on family?" I let out a slow breath. "No," I said. "I'm someone who finally learned to say no." They didn't understand. They didn't even try to. And honestly, I didn't expect them to. The conversation ended cold, and just like that, I became the villain of my own family. The selfish, heartless brother who refused to help his sister, the son who let money come before blood, the cousin everyone whispered about at family gatherings. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Emily went ahead with the wedding. I heard it wasn't as grand as she wanted. The dress was still expensive, the venue still fancy, but they had to cut corners. Maybe they even had to pay for things themselves, something I doubt Emily had ever done before. She never thanked me for what I did contribute, but I wasn't expecting her to. A few weeks later, I got a message from one of my cousins. You did the right thing, they said. People like them never stop taking unless you stop giving. I stared at the message for a while before putting my phone down. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't guilty. I wasn't even sad. I was just done, and it felt good.